Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? The first piece of news we have for you is about the CCP virus and a claimed mutation. In a recent study coming out in the journal Cell, researchers claim that they have found mutations in the CCP virus that are supposed to make it more transmissible. This data should be alarming if accurate. There is, however, one significant caveat. The original samples for China aren't available. China destroyed these in the very early days of the CCP virus outbreak. This means what we might consider a mutation now may be something from the original sample that we simply have not been able to identify. Further to this, there may also be a mutation which makes the virus replicate better. This means not only do we have better transference between individuals, the individuals will become more sick as a result of this replication and therefore more likely to infect others. This creates a rather unpleasant and somewhat perpetual cycle. These results come on the heels of their original publication of this in the preprint server back in April. At the time, there was a lot of questions and valid criticisms about their methodologies. As a result, the editors requested the researchers conduct additional experiments to prove what they were claiming. They did this by analyzing British patient data. Those who had COVID-19 had more viral particles with them than those who did not. This would back up their argument that it better replicates due to these mutations. That is the first issue with this particular research. Secondary to that is that we do not know if this new mutated variety of the CCP virus is responsible for the outbreak as we know it now, or if the original virus was able to do as much damage as it has. If that is true, then this new mutation may be responsible for a considerable growth in the pandemic. Bearing in mind this particular piece of news, the US case rate for the CCP virus has continued to grow week on week of late. It's now sitting at more than 50,000 diagnoses per day. This is a drastic increase in the rate from earlier. The concern here is that if the US cannot get the disease under control, it cannot reopen, cannot remove lockdowns, and the economy cannot restart. It is this growth in cases that has led places like Europe to ban travel to America. This, in conjunction with some Chinese bans and other countries, leads to the obvious conclusion that America is not going to come back from its current economic problems until such times it gets the CCP virus under control. While we have these outbreaks occurring, there is a continued effort to develop a vaccine. And two pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer and BioNTech, have just achieved a milestone with regards to that. The vaccine is known as BNT162b1, a rather catchy name. What it does do, however, is get your attention in the form of an immune response. Unlike convalescent serum, otherwise known as serum therapy, this response is much higher than what you would get with that. This means that the vaccine alone achieves what most other vaccines do. That is, it activates the immune system, which sends out antibodies, which tag the virus or other disease, other pathogen, or anything else it needs to get access to, and allows the immune cells to respond to those new tagged items. Generally speaking, it's quite effective, but it takes a short period of time to build up to that response. This slight lag is why you'll often find that after an initial dose of a vaccine for something like influenza, you'll feel slightly unwell as the body tries to respond to it, trying to find the right immune cells to produce the right antibodies. And this was something they found with this particular vaccine. A relatively large number of the participants who took part in the phase 1-2 trial experienced a fever after the second dose of the vaccine. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. If it takes multiple doses, as we suspected would be the case for most vaccines, it's going to be a long, drawn-out process to get everybody vaccinated against the CCP virus. It is also going to require a much larger stockpile. where you might only require 7 billion doses of the original vaccine for a single dose regime, you're now going to require 14 billion. You can see how this becomes a problem, both logistically and economically. The vaccine trial we are talking about in particular only had a very small cohort of 45 people aged between 18 and 55. They received their multiple doses of the vaccine over 21 days. What is really interesting about this vaccine is that it uses messenger RNA. This is a form of genetic material that will get into the cell and is specifically made so that the cell will read it and start producing the necessary antibodies. To draw a really bad comparison, you can almost think of it as being like an short-term genetic modification program. It gets in, it has its effect, and then it goes away. But for that short period in which it's active, it alters the genome. In other news, we have achieved a milestone with the CCP virus that is far less appealing. Over 500,000 people have now died, and more than 10 million have been infected. This is based on the official statistics from Johns Hopkins University. They also rely on official statistics from China, and we have questions about those particular numbers. Overall, the rest of the trend for every other country has been incredibly daunting, if not outright depressing. This is because more than a quarter of the cases are being reported in America. This is then followed by Brazil and then Russia. America's cases are concentrated to only a few states, but these massive spikes in diagnoses in those states are significant. They account for a massive increase across the country, but are very concentrated. In most other states, there has been a slight rise as each of those states has reduced their restrictions. While we're talking about specific states within America, we need to talk about Alabama. The virus is making Sweet Home Alabama, primarily through the actions of idiots. In Tuscaloosa, Alabama, officials have had to make a public statement about the college students and their idiotic behavior. They are organizing what are called COVID-19 parties. The point of these parties is to see who gets the CCP virus first. The prize for winning this is a monetary pot in which everybody contributes so much to attend the party, and then they get tested. Yes, college-educated students are actively going out of their way to expose themselves to the CCP virus. They either are idiots, inbred, or simply unaware of the long-term consequences of the CCP virus. What they should know is all about the effect it has on the lungs in the long term. Lung capacity is nearly permanently depressed after someone has been exposed to the CCP virus. This means these COVID-19 parties are likely to create a generation of students who will permanently be unable to breathe to the same level they were prior to exposure, and in some cases, as much as 30% less. It is this and other lingering effects of the CCP virus that could be just as important in the long-term health system than the CCP virus is now. The conversation provides a very good breakdown of just what's happening during care and after care. This covers things like confusion and the effect of being intubated for a period of time. This could lead to things like delirium. Then you have the chronic effect on lungs. As we mentioned, being exposed to the CCP virus can cause significant deflation of lung capacity. This owes to the way the virus damages the various cells that make up the lungs. Then you have the effect it has on smell and taste. We've mentioned before that a surprisingly large portion of patients appear to lose their sense of smell and now sense of taste. Most of these do not recover either of those abilities after they have recovered. That means up to 90% of patients who have had the CCP virus may not be able to smell or taste things properly. Then there are concerns about whether or not it's causing blood clotting. There is a large portion of the CCP virus population who is at risk of severe blood clots. These can cause heart attack, stroke, and more, leading to permanent damage that is unable to be resolved. Brain damage is permanent and heart damage is generally just as much. This means that if you have one of these issues during it, then you are likely to have permanent impairment. Then it affects things like the heart, blood glucose levels through diabetes, and more. These are covered in greater detail in the Conversations article on this, and we strongly suggest you read it. While we've just spoken about the possible damage to the brain from blood clotting, we also have an interesting video showing how the brain can clear out dead neurons like those found due to a blood clot. The way the brain is structured and how everything gets in and gets out means that the brain does not very efficiently remove waste, nor can it get things in there, for example, medication. This means understanding how it clears out things like dead neurons could help us in improving conditions like Parkinson's, where you have a buildup of protein clots. The researchers were able to do this by specifically targeting one cell in the brain to be destroyed. They then proceeded to track the glial cells, which are the immune cells in the brain responsible for cleaning it up, with fluorescent markers. This particular observation could be important in seeing why both the elderly are more likely to develop various neurological disorders, and also how we could treat younger people who have developed or acquired various neurological disorders. Next, we have an interesting study about sleeping and how heterosexual couples sleep better when they are together. This is an interesting study because it looks at the various behaviors that occur within the brain and body when you are not consciously awake and active. This means that what's occurring shouldn't be controlled by anything that is governed by personality, but rather the unconscious mind. The study looked at various relationships, primarily couples and then individuals, over 2 successive weekends. This gave them 4 nights of data. The people involved would go to bed with a variety of measurements being taken, primarily brain waves, heart activity, movement, and muscle tension. They would be monitored either with their partner or individually. This led to a 10% more time spent in REM sleep. REM sleep is supposed to be the period where the brain undergoes most of its sorting and activity. It's essentially where the brain does its organization. The body itself tends to become quite relaxed and refreshed during this period of sleep. That means REM sleep is important for recovery. If people are spending more time in REM sleep when they're with their partner than not, that would mean that you recover better when sleeping with your significant other. While we're talking about sleep, let's also consider a study about the adenosine receptors. Adenosine receptors are what are targeted by caffeine. We've spoken about caffeine at great length before now, and a link to the video on what it is and how it works can be found in the appropriate section of this video, either the description or the links above. Something that we were unaware of at the time is this recent study that shows some interesting effects that it might have. There is an abundance of various adenosine receptors found in skeletal muscle and brown adipose tissue. Brown adipose tissue is distinct from most adipose tissue that you would know of, that being white adipose tissue. The brown adipose tissue is involved in a lot of metabolic processes, particularly around keeping the body warm. The research found that there is a relationship between the expression of these receptors in those locations and counteracting the effects of aging. This could also help in moderating obesity. While we're looking at various medical effects that could be of benefit, let's look at a case study where a surgeon has been able to successfully reattach a penis after it was nearly cut off. Not only was it cut off, but it occurred a day prior to the surgery. As a general rule, any surgery to reattach something that's been detached from the body should occur as soon as possible after the fact. This is because within minutes, cells begin to die, tissue is damaged, and so on. That means the body may not take the grafted part of their body back if too much time has expired. The case study itself involves a 34-year-old man with a history of paranoid schizophrenia who tried to cause himself harm during a particularly rough psychotic episode. This itself should exemplify some of the broader issues behind self-harm, and in this case, what can lead to some of the most complicated surgeries. It is the nature of how he was injured that both led to the delays in the final surgery and in getting it sorted. One of the big problems they had was that it took 15 hours to find the patient initially. That means there was no blood supply for 15 hours. This would have already damaged the organ in question. Then you have to consider how it was detached and all the damage to the blood vessels. They found that at least some of these were still able to be revived and reused. This included veins and arteries. They are able to get a vein back up and running by grafting part of an arm vein to his penis vein and getting that blood flow going. This meant that they had some reconstructed and reconnected vessels. What they did not have was arterial blood flow. This occurred 8 hours later, and that was due to the nature of all the injuries the patient had suffered during the process of this occurring. That means it had been 23 hours by the time blood flow resumed to his penis. That is blood flow. There's another system you need to be aware of with the penis, and that is all of the nerves. Unfortunately, at least one of the major nerves had retreated too far back after being severed to be recovered, but they were able to get blood flow going, and most of the other nerves as well. In this case, the patient should make a reasonable degree of recovery, with most of the functionality of the penis still there. What they need to be concerned about is the post-care, primarily the psychiatric support needed to avoid this occurring again. Hopefully, his recovery will go well, even if we don't know exactly why he did what he did. While talking about mysteries we don't understand, there's been an outbreak of an unknown cause of death for elephants in Botswana. Over the last 2 months, more than 350 elephants have been found dead. This mass die-off of elephants has been occurring in Botswana, and most of the elephants have been found near water sources, in the northern parts of the Okavango Delta. This should be a protected site for elephants, and there have been no deaths found in nearby Namibia that match with what's occurring here. It does not seem that most of the elephants died due to poachers or similar activity. What is really interesting is that locals have reported that elephants have been seen walking around in circles. That sort of behavior would indicate a neurological problem, rather than poisoning or violence. There have previously been outbreaks of anthrax leading to the deaths of elephants, but that was initially ruled out in this case. Unfortunately, we still don't know what is causing this die-off of elephants, but hopefully we'll know soon, as the government has said that they are sending samples off to be tested. That was some time ago, and we still don't know what's happening. The concern is that whatever pathogen might be harming the elephants could either lead them to become more aggressive and violent, or it could be transferred to humans. Knowing what's happening is important for not only elephant safety, but for that of humans. While we're on the topic of mysterious zoonotic diseases, there's currently a virus that is spreading throughout the southern west of America, otherwise known by the name bunny Ebola. This is yet another poor sign for America, who's already having enough trouble dealing with the CCP virus. But in at least 7 states spread across the southwest, thousands of rabbits are dying from an outbreak of a contagious disease known as rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. Much like with humans, you can imagine what the hemorrhagic virus does. It causes them to bleed uncontrollably and then die. This is not the first time the virus has been found in America, but previously it has always been in small, easily controlled areas that could prevent its spread, but in this case it's spreading across multiple states very quickly, and that's not a good sign. Not only is it spreading across multiple states, but it's affecting domesticated and wild animals alike. The reason this virus is so bad is simply this. It's very efficient both at killing animals and spreading. That means it has the best of both elements. It takes only 3 days from being infected for the virus to incubate and then kill its host. Those rabbits that do survive will, however, continue to spread it for up to 2 months. It's spread through blood, urine, and feces. Rabbits and other various similar creatures have a bad habit of eating their own feces. This owes to the inefficiencies of their GI tract and the fact that once it goes through the first time, they can then access resources within it that they previously couldn't. This means a rabbit may both spread the disease directly but also infect others through food it has consumed. This is one of the big reasons why the US authorities are making rules that even if only one animal is identified as infected, all animals within the possession of the owner must be killed. This minimizes the chance that if one animal gets sick and spreads it to another that survives, then they will not continue to spread the disease beyond that initial site. The site itself will have to be thoroughly cleaned, as the virus can survive in a room temperature environment for more than 3 months. At a very high temperature, that being above 50 degrees centigrade, it can manage for hours, and killing it by freezing is not an option. That means without a cure, and there isn't one, there is no way to prevent its spread effectively without euthanizing animals and thorough sterilization of the environment. There is a vaccine available, but getting it into America requires special approvals, and that takes a long time, sometimes more than a month, which means those animals that have been infected cannot be vaccinated before they have done their damage. While on the topic of animals, let's look at this bizarre video that's come out recently that shows sharks actively living inside a volcano. This is the volcano known as Kavachi, located in the Soloman Islands. Its most recent volcanic eruption occurred in 2014. These sharks and other creatures are actively living in the volcano where they could die at any moment. And the question this raises is, how do they survive? Do they have some idea about when the volcano will erupt, or is there something else that they do that could otherwise protect them? While we're on the topic of protecting animals, we need to mention the identification of a new swine flu strain within China that could possibly lead to the next pandemic. In recent years, we've had to consider things like the H1N1 strain that led to a pandemic in 2009. This was known as swine flu then we had bird flu, and we've had the CCP virus right now. The problem with this particular swine flu strain that they've identified is that it has all of the hallmarks we know are associated with a pandemic and infection, particularly the ability to adapt and then infect humans. This means that more than half of China's pig population has been culled in an effort to try and stop it spreading, and that has not been successful. This also has relevance for humans. The particular strain that we're talking about here has been shown to have no protective benefit imparted from the seasonal flu. That means that if you are infected with the normal annual influenza, or if you have the influenza vaccine each year, this will not provide you with any protection from this new swine flu strain. When they were looking at human infection rates, they found that over 10% of the workers for the factories and places where the swine were kept had already been infected, and that as much as 4 and a bit % of the population in China had also been exposed. The silver lining to this is that there does not seem to be any human-to-human transmission yet. That of course creates another problem. The virus has not yet adapted to be transmitted from a human to a human, but that does not mean that the longer it is in a human, the less likely that is. Quite the opposite, in fact. The more humans that are infected, the more likely the virus is to adapt to be able to be transferred from one to another, just like with the CCP virus. Our final item for this week is an interesting environmental topic, and it's about a Saharan dust cloud that's moving across the US. It's not only a dust cloud, but it's massive and turning the sky a bizarre orange color. Dust plumes coming from Sahara will often come across the Atlantic. Their sheer size, volume, and the wind will carry them a long way given what it's made from. This isn't that surprising, but the frequency is increasing, and this is the second to appear in about a week. This means those cities, counties, and states along the southeastern coast of America are likely to experience the effects most strongly. This has had an effect over the millennia it's been occurring by imparting various nutrition and similar to the parts of America where it affects them. It also has effects on what you see of an evening and at sunrise and sunset. Ultimately, this bizarre phenomena is very interesting from an environmental point of view, as it has a wide variety of effects. Many of these are discussed in the original article coming from the conversation. But in short, it's an important part of the way the world works and how various resources are shifted around. That's all the news items we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you may have below.